Hello, and welcome to Further Consideration. My name is Glenn Hinkle. I am a graduate student pursuing my master's degree in philosophy at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. This semester, one of my projects is to create an internet presentation on a topic relating to epistemology. Well, what exactly is epistemology, you might be asking? That is a great question. Simply defined, it is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from simple opinion. It is the philosophy of how we know whatever it is we happen to know. Ancient philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle understood knowing to be related to doing. Exactly how we came to knowledge was just sort of baked into the cake of being human. This general viewpoint held fast until the 17th century, when there was an explosion of new scientific and philosophical thought. In the 1600s, we have figures such as the astronomer Galileo Galilei, the mathematicians Sir Isaac Newton and Blaise Pascal, and the philosopher Rene Descartes emerging onto the scene with a flurry of advancements in both science and in philosophy. It is Rene Descartes that I wish to focus this presentation on. Specifically, I wish to address his method of doubt, his proofs for God's existence, and his trap of subjectivism. Rene Descartes is widely considered the father of modern philosophy. His work, Meditations on First Philosophy, was released in 1641 and included the bulk of his epistemology. Also included in this work was an added selection of 7 sets of objections to his ideas and his responses to those objections. Between the original work itself and the added objections and comments, we are left with a wealth of information regarding Descartes' thoughts concerning epistemology and the concept of knowledge. Descartes begins with the method of doubt. Using the construction of a house as an example, he describes how the architect will excavate trenches and remove all the sand and unstable materials in order for the foundation itself to rest on solid ground. This, he claims, is similar to what he set out to do by identifying everything that was doubtful or unstable in his own thinking and throwing it aside in order to reach a foundation of justified beliefs. This method of doubt is one of Descartes' signature ideas. Descartes wants to eliminate all of his questionable opinions so that he may be certain that the knowledge remaining qualifies as justified belief. To continue the architectural analogy, Descartes employs skeptical doubt as a tool for clearing the ground in epistemic demolition. After clearing the mental landscape of opinion and doubt, Descartes sets out to systematically question sensory experience itself. He begins this inquiry by investigating our dream states. He argues that for every sensory experience we have while we are awake, we can also imagine ourselves having while dreaming. Sights, sounds, people, places that we experience in dreams are all very similar, if not the same as their counterparts while we are awake. We all tend to agree that whatever we perceive while dreaming does not originate from things located outside of ourselves, but rather from some internal source. So, if that is so obvious to us in terms of our dreaming state, then Descartes asks, why are we so certain that our sensory experiences while we are awake are derived from real things located outside of us? In other words, on what basis are we certain that external objects play a real role while we are awake, yet play no role at all while we are dreaming? Perhaps the same faculty inside us that produces those sensory experiences while dreaming is also responsible for sensory experiences while awake. While the implications of this are enormous, Descartes has not come this far without consequences. If we cannot be certain that sensory experiences while awake are produced by real external objects, then how can we be certain that all experiences are not some sort of a dream and have no relation at all to the real objective external world? Descartes has stumbled onto the possibility of universal delusion. Every sensory experience we have could very well be a delusion and not related to anything in a real objective world. To escape universal delusion, Descartes offers the example of an all-powerful deceiver. Or in other words, he asks whether or not God himself could not be playing tricks with us and deceiving us. Perhaps the Creator is all-powerful, but is not all good, some sort of evil genius. If this were true, then we could be deceived by even the simplest and most apparently evident matters. In other words, we could all be universally delusional. This question casts doubt on our cognitive nature itself and asks if we can be certain that it is not, in fact, flawed by design. All of these doubts add up cumulatively, leading Descartes to assert that something, someone, is doubting. So even if God were an evil genius, we must still exist in order to be deceived. We have hit bedrock at last and come to some sort of knowledge that cannot be assailed. It qualifies as a justified belief to assert that we know we exist simply because we can entertain thoughts such as doubt. The mere fact that we can think through and process doubt is proof that we are something. In his own words, Descartes says, quote, "This proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind." End quote. Simplified even further, this becomes Descartes' most famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." What is impressive about this route to proving justified belief is that it is not built upon syllogism or logic, but rather the knowledge of our existence is self-evident by the intuition of our own minds. However, what Descartes discovered was only the limited existence of a thinking being. In other words, for all of the certitude he found in claiming, "I think, therefore I exist," it only applies in a very limited scope. He did not solve the problem of how we reach knowledge about anything objective outside of ourselves. If all we know is that we think and therefore we are, then how do we claim to know about anything other than ourselves? How is it that we know about anything outside of ourselves, such as the real objective world? This is the trap of subjectivity. It is a natural consequence of conceiving the human consciousness in the manner in which Descartes did. How can we escape this trap? To escape the individualistic subjective viewpoint, Descartes needed to show the existence of another being with whom he would be in relation. So this time, instead of an evil deceiver, Descartes argues for the existence of God as an existence outside of himself, a being with which he must be in relation. His basic argument was that he had an idea of God, and that idea contained the aspect of God being an infinite being. Descartes understood that he himself was not infinite, but was in fact limited and finite. So how could he, a limited, finite being, possibly imagine an infinite, unlimited God? Descartes argues that God himself must exist in order to impress upon him the idea of infinity, the very idea of an infinite being, God. So this, he argues, proves that the ideas of the real objective world can come to us, not simply through senses, but by direct transmission from God. In one sense, the proof for God solves some of the trap of subjectivity, but not all of it. The trap of subjectivity really centers on how Descartes conceptualized the human conscience. Descartes viewed consciousness as sort of a container. What we are aware of is inside our consciousness, and what we are not aware of is outside of our consciousness. The innocent victim is reality, which ends up being something that must, by this conceptualization, be inside our consciousness. This occurs because Descartes imagines self-consciousness leading us to understand the other. Or more simply put, the individual ego precedes knowledge of other objects. This is the error of his order of operations that represents the final problem with the trap of subjectivity. Descartes fails to escape his own trap because of how he conceived human consciousness to operate. By comparison, Thomas Aquinas reverses this order and asserts that it is in fact knowledge of non-self, knowledge of others, which then leads us to understand ourselves as the knower, the ego. Just by switching the order of operation, we free ourselves from being trapped in our own subjectivity. By first knowing real objects in an external objective world, we then come to know ourselves. There is no such thing as a purely subjective state then, since we are always in relation. So in conclusion, there may be some truth to the claim that because we think, therefore we are. But sadly, Descartes fails to provide a solid argument for his conception of human consciousness. The fact remains that we cannot discover an individual I without also simultaneously discovering non-I, or other. To claim that I exist is to contrast I with non-I. Thus, to demand that we are individual egos subjectively experiencing reality is simply not justified. Descartes brought us nearly all the way there, but failed to succeed in his argument because he mistakenly placed the individual subjective I alone and first, instead of in combination with and secondary to others. Well, that wraps up presentation 1. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more presentations in the future.